Have you ever wondered if there's a totally different way to look at the market? Well, today we're doing just that. We're diving into a really fascinating case study on the S&P 500, and we're going to be using a unique method called market DNA. We'll walk through one complete cycle, step by step, just to see how it looks in the real world. Ready to see the market from a whole new angle? Let's get right into it.
So what exactly is market DNA? At its heart, it's a proprietary geometric system. It basically uses these specific geometric shapes to map out potential market movements. You can think of it as a kind of blueprint for how the market might behave. Now, just to be clear, this is not your typical analysis. We're not looking at fundamentals or technicals here. Our goal today is just to observe how this method gets applied. That's it.
So, keeping that in mind, we're just going to follow the sequence of events exactly as they were documented in the source material. Let's jump straight into the first phase of this S&P 500 cycle and see how the initial plan was put together.
All right, phase one, the entry plan. Every trade has to start with a plan, and this one's no different. This whole thing was set up on February 17th, 2026. This is ground zero for the entire strategy.
And here's what that plan looks like on the chart. You can see the initial setup has two potential places to get in. The first one, that's the primary entry marked as level M, and the second one down at level PC, that's kind of like a backup. It just provides a little flexibility, depending on what the market decides to do. Okay, let's get into the numbers behind this plan. So we've got our two entry points, M and PXE. But what's really key here are the risk management parameters. You see something called trapezoid time duration. That sets a 30-day window for this cycle. And then you've got the third triangle domain and the risk coefficient. These are specific parts of the market DNA method, and they help define the risk for the trade. These are really the core ingredients that shape the whole strategy.
Now, to make this all a bit more real, let's run through a quick hypothetical. Imagine you're starting with $100,000. The plan says the max you're willing to see it go down is 5%, so $5,000. That's your risk management. Based on those numbers, an average entry price is calculated, and that in turn tells you how big each trade should be. It's a very systematic way to figure out your position size. And if you're wondering how they get to that trade size, well, the source material tells us exactly how. Both trade sizes are calculated using the hypothetical capital, the investor's maximum allowed drawdown, the third triangle domain percentage, the risk coefficient, and the contract size. So you can see how all those parameters we just looked at all come together to give you a number.
Of course, a good plan doesn't just have an entry, it's got to have an exit strategy too. And this one laid out three potential profit targets right from the very beginning. T1 is your first milestone. T2 is called a safe exit, a spot where you might consider taking some profit off the table. And finally, T3 is the main goal, the full exit. That's where the cycle would be totally complete.
Okay, now this is where things get really interesting. You'd probably expect these phases to happen in a nice, neat order, right? Phase 1, then 2, then 3. Well, that's not always how it works. You see, the market has its own rhythm, and this method is designed to just follow along. So let's find out which phase actually showed up next in this particular cycle.
And, surprise, we jumped right over phase 2. The very next documented event is actually phase 3. This happened on February 18th, 2026, just a day later. So let's take a look at what went down. And here's the chart that shows it happening. You can see the price moved up and made contact with that apex N level. According to the source material, that event marks the completion of phase 3.
So let's just recap the sequence of events so far. The trade was opened at the primary entry, level M. Then the price took off. It never went down to that secondary entry point at all. Instead, it moved straight up and hit the phase 3 target at level N. It's a perfect example of how these phases don't necessarily happen in numerical order.
So, we've watched this cycle go from phase 1, skip phase 2, and go straight to phase 3. But what does that mean for phase 2? That's the big question, right? And it leads us to the final part of this documentation as it stands today. And that brings us to the one question that's still hanging in the air with this ongoing documentation. Will the next phase be phase 2? The honest answer is, we don't know yet, because the cycle is still unfolding. It's a great reminder that observing the market is a dynamic process, not a prediction game.
All right, before we finish up, we absolutely have to go over a few important disclaimers. Please pay close attention.
First, and most importantly, nothing here is financial advice. The market DNA system has its own specific rules, like a ban on using leverage above 10. It is so important to never ever invest essential funds that you can't afford to lose.
This explainer is only for documentation and public verification. And always remember, any risk management you do has to follow your own personal instructions.
And that's our look at this particular S&P 500 cycle as it's been documented so far. If this has piqued your curiosity and you want to learn more, you can check out the source for yourself at marketdnaedge.com. We hope this gave you a new lens to look at the market through. Thanks for watching.